Over the years, I've gained this impression that if a game is to be considered art or taken seriously by the video games industry, it has to be one that prioritizes storytelling or cinematic presentation, regardless of if its gameplay is actually innovative. And it's unfortunate because while some of my favorite games are absolutely these kinds of experiences, but so are games like Devil May Cry 5, which I feel is often dismissed by gaming media as dumb fun because of a lack of focus on storytelling, despite offering some of the richest combat mechanics you'll find in any video game. And I feel like hardcore action games are just as entitled as any other genre to be heralded at the peak of the gaming industry for how much fun and freedom they offer to the player. And that's exactly what I find Evil West to be, a great action game deserving of your attention. It's an excellent new entry in a genre that hasn't seen many new franchises take hold, and hopefully this review can let you know if it's the right game for you. Now let's get this out of the way first. You're not playing Evil West for its story.
It's not very good, is it?
You'll be playing it for the fluid combat and engaging systems. But what is on offer in terms of story and setting establishes a pretty interesting world. You play as Jesse Rentier, field agent for a secret government agency run by his father, dedicated to one mission and one mission only, killing vampires. And when Jesse uncovers a vampire conspiracy that can threaten the whole of the United States, it's up to him to stop it. Joining Jesse for this adventure is a colorful cast of characters that are noticeably progressive for a setting that takes place a few years after the Civil War.
Not that I'm complaining.
There's Emily Blackwell, who fights to be taken seriously as a female doctor. There's Emily's ward Virgil, who's the group's inventor. And then most prominently is Gravenor, who fought alongside Jesse's father during the Civil War and serves as his mentor. Despite how interesting these characters are on the surface, the writing lacks a charisma to make them memorable. The plot attempts an emotional through line about how Jesse and the antagonists are connected by loss, but it's simply failed by poor dialogue, like this memorable gem.
Bad and a penny will buy me a cup of warm piss, Doctor.
Wait, what did you just say?
And the main antagonist really fails as a foil to Jesse because he reads as a grown man, because he is one, and she reads like a teenager taking her first Philosophy 101 class.
Humans build empires in the name of progress, with no thought spared for those paying the mortal cost of their quest for glory. That is true vampirism.
I'm psychotic seriously, I'm just adorable, even when you're threatening me.
And the story is sometimes told in a bizarre fashion, with cutscenes interrupting gameplay in a fashion that makes it look like they were meant to cover loading screens. So in big moments like character deaths do happen, I didn't really feel anything. And this is ignoring the elements of the story that simply don't make a lot of sense. Like, how are vampires supposed to be some secret society when they employ humans and attack regular villages? And keep in mind, these aren't the sexy vampires that you've seen in film. Most of them look like disgusting leech monsters, so I don't know how they go unnoticed.
Make it make sense.
The best thing to say about the story is that it's inoffensive, has cool moments, and houses the action well. Oftentimes, Evil West will be the best looking action game you've seen in a long time. The way that Jesse contrasts so well with some of these lovingly crafted environments meant that sometimes I just had to stop and appreciate the view. Other times though, you get stuff like this.
Mr. Jesse, but I found a tunnel that might lead to the
What's wrong with your face?
At least on its default settings, in my experience, the game does not handle bright areas well. It's at its best in a dark wood or a moonlit night where it can play with contrast well. But let the game try to render a kitchen in the daytime and you'll be reaching for your sunglasses. Sunlight is so bright in some areas that it can actually affect gameplay and prevent you from spotting enemies. Like in this cutscene, you'd be forgiven for thinking the characters are looking down to keep themselves from being blinded, when in fact they're looking down because they're being scolded. But since you're fighting vampires, most of the missions take place at dusk or at night, meaning that for most of your playthrough the game will look simply amazing. Now let's talk combat. Simply put, Evil West's combat system is one of the most rewarding I've experienced in recent memory. Which is impressive because when you look at the individual elements that make up this combat system, they're not necessarily that impressive or innovative. Its third-person shooting mechanics are fun, but not necessarily groundbreaking. And it's ever really only serviceable as a melee-focused brawler. But when you mix these two elements together is when you get something that's truly refreshing. Melee is performed by pressing R1 to use a gauntlet on Jesse's right hand to punch vampires into mincemeat. And I have to note that the excellent sound design throughout this game really sells the impact of these punches. Now press L1 and you'll use the zapper on Jesse's left hand, which adds a lot of dynamism to the combat. It's the most innovative aspect of the melee system and is most often used to counter enemies and set them up for combos. It can also be used to pull enemies toward yourself, but it's much more fun to turn yourself into a lightning bolt and bring yourself to enemies. The ability to zip point to point to almost any enemy on the battlefield at any time makes it one of the most enjoyable abilities I've seen in any action game. Great both as an evasive mechanic and as a way to get in close and stay on the offensive. It's simply a great system that never got old throughout my entire playthrough. Layered on top of this is a super state that makes you unstoppable for 7 seconds. The only critique of this super state is that it should have had its own meter, because as it stands, it pulls from the same bar that's used to pull off some of the Zapdos flashier moves. And if you play on the hardest difficulty like I did, you can't ignore the super state, meaning that some of these flashier moves will simply not be used. Both Gauntlet and Zapper abilities can be improved with the leveling system, which grants you access to perks that can be spent on linear upgrades. For example, punching can be timed to do more damage, you can learn to dodge and essentially perform a disappearing act in the middle of melee combos, you can upgrade a super state to become even more unstoppable than it already is. Now let's talk about guns, because they're handled uniquely in Evil West. All of them work off of a passive cooldown, meaning there is no active reloading. And the weapons on offer give you a suite of tools with which to deal death to your enemies. As expected in any Western themed game is your 6-shooter, which can be used to juggle enemies in the air. Its final upgrade allows it to shoot lightning infused bullets that absolutely shreds enemy health. Next up is my personal favorite, which is the Rentier rifle, a repeater that's used to do precision damage. Again, I have to praise the excellent sound design because this gun sounds so satisfying to shoot.
That sounds lovely.
Its main gimmick is that it can do critical damage to enemies if you're able to hit a target that shows up intermittently. Oh, and did I mention that the final upgrade turns this thing into a railgun? Then there's the crossbow, which essentially functions as a machine gun. And I'm just going to say it, this gun is bad, do not use it. It's meant to be an alternative to the Rentier repeater, but does so little damage that it's not worth using. You also get a Gatling gun, which is hard not to be excited about. But its super long cooldown and relatively low damage make it hard to recommend prioritizing on a first playthrough. Though I admit I may not be able to dissuade you, given that its final upgrade turns it into a literal death ray. Speaking of upgrades, improvements to your weapons become available as you level up and by finding blueprints throughout levels. You can select upgrades in a non-linear fashion, but unlike melee upgrades, which is unlocked by perks, you have to use cash to improve your guns, and since it's limited, you won't be able to improve everything in one playthrough. So choose carefully before you make an investment, though you can always respec in between levels. And next up is my second favorite weapon, the shotgun, which can stun larger enemies and outright kill smaller ones. Even unupgraded, it's so satisfying watching enemies explode to bits that you'll be itching to use it anytime you can. For our final two weapons, we have the flamethrower, which is just as effective as you'd expect, and the crippling rod, which is straight out of Castlevania and can be used to stun enemies and set them up for combos. And finally, you have sticks of dynamite, which when fully upgraded can be thrown to turn into a devastating lightning tornado. And together with the melee options, these guns provide Jesse a complete kit with which to take down his enemies, one that remains consistently engaging throughout the campaign. My one critique of the combat system is really more of a nitpick, and it's that the color that denotes an enemy is ready to be executed is pretty similar to the color that denotes an unblockable attack, which nearly got me killed on more than one occasion. There are 16 levels in Evil West, and they're all pretty linear. This isn't a bad thing because there are branching paths that lead to lore and chests for those who are adventurous. And some of these chests contain exclusive perks, meaning that I do recommend taking your time in each level. Aside from just running around and killing enemies, you'll have a few distractions that break up the monotony. One are these Resident Evil 4 style minecart rides that are unfortunately exclusive to one level. The rest are just these brain dead puzzles. In between most levels is a hub area that you'll return to where you'll get more story, but you'll also have the opportunity to respec Jesse. All in all, the level design is very serviceable, and I enjoy that you can find some exclusive perks by exploring each level, as it provides more incentives to go off the beaten path than just finding flavor text. Where to offer a critique is that levels often don't incentivize you to kill enemies in stylish ways. You can knock enemies into TNT crates or metal cages, but this won't give you health like doing executions does. Having a style meter that contributed to a rank or grade at the end of each level would severely help replayability. There are also some aspects about this level design that doesn't just feel old school, it simply feels old. Pathing through levels is limited to explicitly marked waypoints, meaning that no matter how easy it may seem for Jesse to overcome any gap or obstacle, if it's not the predetermined path, you can't go through it. Similarly, if you're able to spot enemies before entering a designated combat arena, they're magically invulnerable to your bullets. And this is so silly because you could simply have the enemy spawn after you enter the arena. Usually the biggest offense committed by the level design are these checkpoints that make you rewatch unskippable cutscenes before you can redo a fight. And when you're playing on the hardest difficulty, there's already a chance that you'll die a lot, so I don't like the feeling of my time being wasted. And on the topic of difficulty, I played on Evil, which the game only recommends playing for a second playthrough. And I truly believe that how you feel about enemy adds will truly determine how you feel about this difficulty. You'll constantly have to fight mini bosses with endless waves of enemies trying to distract you. And they're simply frustrating to die to, mostly because they feel more like a nuisance than an actual challenge. presence of these mobs is balanced by the fact that you can use them for health or to knock them into enemies, but most times I simply found them annoying. These mobs also show up in the game's few boss fights, which tend to be extremely long to the boss's inflated health pools. And they aren't just long, they're also gimmicky, often featuring a weak point that you have to shoot before you get one-shotted. And when you're in one of these long fights and have killed wave after wave of enemies only to die due to a stupid mistake, you really do want to send your controller flying. I just was never able to view the mobs that harass you as legitimate challenges to the fight. Instead, they feel like endless fodder that the game threw at you to cover up how simple some of the mini-bosses are. One thing I think we can all agree on is a terrible idea is the fact that your weapons cooldown don't regenerate when you're outside of combat. This means things that have a longer cooldown like your healing and the Gatling gun don't even start regenerating until you get to the next fight. And this is simply a baffling design decision, one that I feel was made in error as opposed to a strategic decision on difficulty. And if you see this honeycomb-shaped enemy, be prepared for a troll of a time, because he will literally make it so that all enemies are invincible until you kill him. Finally, this game has the most bugs I've seen of any game in recent memory. The only saving grace is that none of them were game-breaking. And importantly, none of them ever got me killed. But if you do buy this game, do know that you're going to run into some jank. All in all, I really loved my time with Evil West. It is a fun and innovative action game that I hope gets a sequel. And I hope this review helped you discover whether it's for you. If so, please feel free to leave a like or subscribe to this channel for more reviews. This has been Harlan Gaming, out.